All right, good morning. It is the 17th, getting just a bit of a late start this morning. I do apologize. Just wanted to get as much of the content and understand the situation in the New York City subway that led directly to the death of Jordan Neely at the hands of former Marine Daniel, and of course, his last name escapes me for the moment, but we'll get to that momentarily. I think there's so much to learn from this killing, the responses by the media, the responses by the pundit class, and what is happening in our society that has led to these types of tragedies. Why are these happening? What does justice even look like? Some just want the perpetrator, whatever the term you want to use, the strap hanger who subdued Neely, put him in a chokehold, and ultimately took action that led to his death. Others, some want him in jail, obviously. Others feel very, very differently. What is that about? I mean, I think the facts, to my way of thinking, are pretty clear. I mean, this was if it wasn't murder, it was definitely manslaughter. He killed somebody. It's just that simple. I mean, there wasn't defense. He wasn't defending anybody. But I do understand, having ridden the subways in the past, not recently, having been in New York at a time when it was a lot more dangerous than it is now, I get the reaction of some, those who are, don't feel, I guess, that there should be consequences for the ex-Marine who killed Jordan Neely. I understand why they feel that way. I don't agree with them, but I get it. I can see two things at once. I don't feel that we're living in a society right now where that, unfortunately, is the norm. I think most of us are taking sides, and we're taking extreme sides. We'll get into that. Let's start with the video of the actual incident on the subway there in New York. By the way, Daniel Penny, the name of the blonde-haired or curly-haired man on the floor on his back. He's got the decedent in a chokehold, and it's a really, spoiler alert, whatever. I think you can tell just from this picture, by the way, from the video there, and it was videotaped by Juan Alberto Vasquez, who we'll hear from in the pages of the New York Post momentarily. But let's just play this so you can really see this. It's very, very disturbing. Obviously, the man is lying there motionless. There are two men standing by watching as Penny is holding Neely, Jordan Neely there down, who's not moving. There's a man taking video of it. That's Vasquez. It's painful. It's awful. I'm not going to spend too much time subjecting you to this, but there's another 30 seconds. Let's go through it because I think we have to see this. This is what is happening in America today. He's not moving. There you see him sort of grit his teeth.
Really got that choke on. Once he defecates, you gotta let him go, alright? If he didn't, percent is low, but he'll be alright.
All right, and then you see you hear the man saying, let him go if he defecates on himself. And I don't know how you don't charge that man. And he was charged. It was the right call. 240-363-7190. Give me a call. Let's talk about it. It was the right call. But so many New Yorkers seem to disagree. I think it's instructive even to look at the different coverages. I apologize for that. Let me mute that altogether. Look at the different coverage that we'll see from it, from all different papers. So what the Post's headline is, New York Post, obviously the conservative or right wing, whatever you want to call it, has a far less sympathetic headline when it comes to the decedent, to the man who was killed, Jordan Neely. Shocking video. I think we can argue that. It was obviously shocking. Shows New York City subway passenger putting unhinged man. So I think that term unhinged is clearly tendentious. It's clearly not objective in any sense of the word. As you watch the video, he's lying pretty much motionless, is Neely. There's a little bit of eye movement at one point. The unhinged comes from descriptions of what was happening prior to what you see on the video. I think that's clearly reckless journalism. I think that's journalism design. It's yellow. It's designed to get people angry, right? Or to get people to bias you against the man who was killed. And I can't in any way sanction that or call that good journalism. It's very interesting the way the New York Times, and by the way, I don't want anyone to think this is somehow I'm defending or showing preference for the way the New York Times covered this, because I don't necessarily feel that way. But the headlines do reflect, in my opinion, the yellow nature of the New York Post journalism versus New York Times, which is more sober, which is even in the headlines clearly more black and white. Here are the facts, rather than trying to, I think, at least with the headlines, maybe in other areas differently, but with the headlines, not trying to inflame you. But that's even debatable. So here's the headline from the Times. Subway rider choked homeless man to death. Medical examiner rules, and then they use the term homicide. So yes, that is, I mean, it's facts, because that is what the medical examiner ruled. Unhinged is not a medical diagnosis. Homicide is. So clearly here, the Times is at least with regard to the headlines, presenting in a more, I think, unbiased fashion. But their magazine coverage, not nearly so much, with a video showing very, very angry people demanding justice, yelling, "We want justice." Clearly, the Times is saying justice means that there be an arrest, that there be consequences for what happened to Jordan Neely. And I don't disagree with that conclusion, but again, they're presenting it from a very clearly from a standpoint that does not reflect many of the views. It would seem to be the majority of views of their readers. And it's unfortunate. I think it would be nice if we could come together and agree that it's not okay to, after you've subdued a man who was acting in a, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but who was acting in a way that did appear to be threatening, that does make you uncomfortable, that you don't want to have to observe on the subway. A man who had in the past been violent, but we don't know whether the people who were actually witnesses to the homicide, the manslaughter. We don't know whether they knew that. We don't know whether Daniel Penny knew that, but who was in fact a person who had been violent in the past and acted aggressively by all accounts. So the New York Times presenting, this video, and I think it's fine. It's news. Again, it's news. But the way this is presented, I think, does to a significant degree reflect their bias. And it is inflammatory. And I'm not sure that's the best way to respond. We'll see what the world, in the end, we'll get to what the World Socialist website says about who's to blame and what can be done about it. Because I think in the end, I'm almost more sympathetic to that outlet's conclusions, the way they ultimately chose to cover this. So I want to, show a lot of different media and how media covers this, because I think we have to understand that. Here's from the Times. And we're not hearing her, so let's get the video voice up.
Housing is a human right. Housing is a human right. Justice! Now! Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! Let go!
All right, so you see the angry crowd demanding justice for Daniel Penny. You see the police in a pretty aggressive fashion dispersing the crowd. It's not pretty, not loving that. Again, so much is what you're presented. So much of how one reacts to a situation like this depends on what you read first, what you see first, what the media that you choose to consume presents to you, and maybe your biases going in. It's so unfortunate that we can't be more objective when situations like this transpire. And I don't mean we, meaning the people who are watching this video. I just mean as human beings. And I think that video shows it, what the New York Times chose to display. I don't have the video up here, but there's another one that I think the Post had, where the police, when they respond to Jordan Neely, are incredibly, it seems from the video, helpful, trying to save the man's life, clearly responding as we would want them to. So again, you can see videos, and they're going to generally reflect the biases of the media that you consume, and the way you read it, the way you see into it, is going to reflect your biases. It's just impossible to avoid that, and it is unfortunate. So I want to just, here is what, we'll just get a little bit more of just the facts of what actually happened and what this journalist, Juan Vasquez, saw and how he described it, at least as reported in the New York Post. Describing Jordan Neely, Juan Vasquez says in Spanish, he started screaming in an aggressive manner. He doesn't care if he goes to jail. And that's when the strap hanger, meaning Daniel Penny, came up behind Neely, took him to the ground in chokehold, keeping him there for 15 minutes. So again, that seems very, culpable behavior, guilty behavior. 15 minutes. You far beyond the point. Now, maybe when you take him to the ground, you've got an argument, right? I mean, a pretty darn good one, according, if you accept the description by Vasquez, and I don't think anyone's disputed it. Screaming, doesn't care if he goes to jail, which is worrisome, because if someone doesn't care if they go to jail, then does that mean they're gonna take a next step and act out in a violent manner that would lead them to be put in jail because they're so hungry and miserable that they just would rather be in jail than on the streets. I mean, it's certainly credible. It's certainly believable. So after Vasquez describes this, he sees the Daniel Penny, the former Marine, he's always described as, and I guess that's to show that he's had training in self-defense and, he knows what a chokehold is. He knows the dangers. Probably it's all true. I think you got to steer a middle ground here. When the first takedown occurred, maybe it's defensible. Maybe it's justifiable. You don't charge him. This man is acting in an unstable manner. Would I call it unhinged? I don't know if I would say that's unhinged. He seems coherent. I think the Post headline is again tendentious. It doesn't reflect the reality. The man is not unhinged. He's not rambling incoherently, but he is acting in an aggressive manner, and it seems to me to justify taking him down, subduing him, not choking him, not holding him down for 15 minutes. So what does Vasquez continue? He's the one who took that video. In the end, we know that Jordan Neely was killed. He died. It's a horrible situation. I think it's a crime. I think the charge is fair, manslaughter. I think that's what should have happened. How does Vasquez respond? Remember, this is the one who was there on the ground, and it's a very interesting response to my eyes. Mixed feelings about the encounter. He says, particularly since he said Neely had not physically attacked anyone. So I guess what he's saying is if there had been an attack, he'd be okay with it. I think that it's, in one sense, it's fine that citizens want to jump in and help. But I think as heroes, we have to use moderation. So he's actually suggesting that Penny's a hero for what he did, which I guess he put himself in some danger, but he knew what he was doing. He's much bigger and taller from that video. And then Vasquez goes on, this would never have happened if the police had shown up within 5 minutes. Then we'd be talking about a true hero. It's complicated. I think that it certainly is complicated. I'm not sure I would call Penny a hero, but it is true. If the police had simply been there, and I think they should be there, I think in 5 minutes, you should have Metro Police responding anytime you have a situation like this. It shouldn't have taken 15 minutes, which I think is kind of the sense on the scene is it took the police a long time to get there. And that is another part of this tragedy. We don't have a responsive police force. We don't have enough people there to protect and serve us. And people do take matters into their own hands, and people die. You don't get to kill somebody. You just don't. If they're not a danger, if you've subdued them, if you're no longer in the zone of danger, and I know the standard is a reasonable fear for your life or safety of yourself or someone others. That standard is fair. And I don't see how Daniel Penny meets that standard. I'm sorry. It took a long time to kill that man. He didn't have to kill him. Again, responses are just not commensurate with the complexity of this situation. A situation where a lot of people ride the subways, and although they're not as dangerous as many think, I can tell you when I used to ride the subway, you would have folks like Jordan Neely, not Jordan Neely because this was 30 years ago, or more, but people who were panhandling, who were aggressive, who would get in your face, and it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't something you wanted to have happen to you. And I understand why there is a reaction. Now, that said, I don't think this is a lynching. I don't see that at all. I think that's way too strong a term, and I think it you lose when you use terms like that don't reflect the reality of the situation. You can disagree with me, 240-363-7190. Lee Fong's piece in The Intercept argues that the blame is on liberals, progressives in the city, those like the woman, I suppose he's saying, who are holding that sign, who repeatedly fought against Mayor Eric Adams' former transit cop's plan, which was his proposal, which is to make it a lot easier for police to simply involuntarily hospitalize people, put them in institutions for the mentally ill. And if that were the case, Adams is saying, and probably in this case he's right, Jordan Neely wouldn't have been killed because he wouldn't have been on the subway. He would have been in a facility. He'd been arrested 40 plus times for violent behavior, aggressive behavior, subway fare jumping. He hadn't paid for his subway ride in that instance, an instance we're seeing. Fong is saying that the problem is progressive liberals are making it too hard to institutionalize dangerous people, scary people, mentally ill people. I don't disagree with that. I don't know if it's all on the blame progressives. It was actually Ronald Reagan who emptied out a lot of the mental institutions in California when he was governor, hardly a progressive in any sense of the word. Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul, both Democrats, the governor of the state of New York and the mayor of the city of New York, have both proposed cutbacks to any kind of social services except for more funding for the police. So you cannot simply lay the blame on progressives who don't want to lock people up in dirty, crowded, dangerous places and asylums. That's basically the Adams plan. And it's not humane. And it's not what we should be supporting. And it's understandable that people like AOC don't like it. And Jumaane Williams, the public advocate, don't like it. But refusing to acknowledge the situation that many face, mostly working class New Yorkers, although there are plenty of more affluent people who ride the subway too. And many poorer people ride the subway. And it's not even that. I think it's $5 now, something like that. Crazy to ride one way or the other. I mean, you can get from Queens to the Bronx, Brooklyn to the Bronx. You can go an awful long way on that fare, but still seems pretty expensive, seems pretty pricey. But again, we're seeing reactions that are not complex, that don't recognize the complexities of the situation. Either, it's an unhinged man, we don't have sympathy for him, or it's a homicide. There doesn't appear to be any way to square that circle. And I think that's where we really, really need to be. We need to try to step back and have some recognition of why this is a bad situation, why it's happening, and what we can do about it in the end to prevent future situations like this, to prevent future deaths like this. It seems to me there are some answers, and unless we take them, unless we address the core problems in society, the violence that created Jordan Neely. Is apparently, I think his father was murdered. Maybe it was one of his parents was murdered when he was a young child. It was incredibly painful for him. Obviously, he was shipped from pillar to post. Those are the kind of programs addressing this, preventing the violence in the first place, to the extent we can, having social workers go out and respond to family violence to prevent deaths, to make sure that people who are victims are getting the help and the support they need, kids, that we don't have homeless people at all, that we have a safe, secure place for everyone to go. That would address these crises to a much greater degree. So in some ways, I do feel that the World Socialist website although I don't love their language, I think they kind of get it in a lot of ways. Jordan Neely's moved on the New York City's subway and the terminal crisis of capitalism. I am not someone who sits here and condemns capitalism on my program. I recognize that, again, it's complicated. Allowing the aggregation of capital to make investments, to start corporations, to start limited liability companies, has led to a lot of innovation, has led to a lot of improvements in the quality of many of our lives. It's also led to terrible, it could well be leading to the end of our planet, right, with the climate crisis. So again, even something, an ism like capitalism, if it's properly controlled, if we as a people tax corporations, tax the wealthy, tax those who profit, I think we all can benefit. Tax the bads like the carbon fuels, the fossil fuels, and the like. And also address the losers in a capitalist system, the Jordan Neelys in a capitalist system, and make sure that nobody has too much and everyone has enough. It seems to me that is how you can address the terminal crisis of capitalism. That is not what the World Socialist website is calling for. They're calling for the abolition of capitalism. I don't know what you replace it with. I don't know how you're gonna, because to me, if you say you don't want capitalism, do you get rid of all markets? How do you determine how to distribute goods or how much production we should have? It doesn't work. You have to have some markets, and you have to have some ability to invest. It's just how it's done that ultimately matters. So that said, much as I criticize much of the conclusions of the World Socialist website and others, they kind of get this right. Mayor Adams and other law and order advocates exaggerate the crime danger. Even as statistics demonstrate that it remains one of the country's safest. So it is a safe city, relatively safe, but that said, there are dangers, and people get it who live in the city, and they don't like it. Yes, I agree that there's a lot of fear stoking from the underlying cause of social issues like mental illness and homelessness. I totally agree with that. And what you see is in cities like San Francisco and New York, the solutions being proposed are not help the homeless. The solutions aren't house the homeless. The solutions aren't let's have more people who are out there intervening to prevent violence from occurring. Let's just ship them out. Let's just put them in buses and vans and ship them out of the city. Or let's warehouse them. That is not humane. That is not right. And what World Socialist website gets to is the overwhelmingly working class passengers are well aware that there have been more public episodes of mental illness, including the confined spaces of the buses and subway, especially since COVID. So they're bearing the brunt of it, right? So the New York Times, which basically represents, the people who shop at Tiffany and Bergdorf Goodman, they are going to focus on how awful it was to respond in the way that Daniel Penny did. That's their focus. They're not concerned with the working class, and in fact, it's in the benefit of the elites to stoke anger and resentment against the working class. And that's exactly what the New York Times is doing. They're also trying to make it a racial issue. I don't think there's any question about it. The video I played, it's a young African-American woman leading the chants. They've often used many of the articles talk about a white man killing a black man. And there's something to that. That's not completely not part of this. But really, what is the ultimate takeaway from my perspective is that the greatest harms that capitalism imposes on us, the kind of raw, unrestrained crony capitalism with fangs, that the greatest harms that it imposes on society the brunt of them are borne by poor, struggling, and working people in all respects. They're most likely to be the victims of violent crime by an enormous margin. They're also more likely to be the perpetrators of violent crime by a very significant margin. And when we ignore these root causes, allow them to fester, it's no surprise that they're going to take matters into their own hands and they're going to turn against each other. The World Socialist website, again, this was ultimately where I decided they got it right. And I, again, don't love all of their rhetoric. But in the absence of a leadership which fights to unite the working class in solidarity and common struggle, workers can become desensitized and become susceptible to individualism and even approve the action of vigilantes. All right, we do need a leadership to unite the working class. But this idea that somehow people become susceptible to individualism and approve vigilantes because they're not getting support, we don't live in a just society. To me, that's kind of BS. This is who we are. People are individualistic. We're both communitarian. We both care about our communities and want our communities to thrive and care about our, fellow family members and people in our neighborhood. Yes, that is all true. And yet at the same time, we are individuals. We want what's best for ourselves and our families more than we want what's best for anybody else. Roxane Gay writes in the New York Times how upset she is that people prioritized or centered their anxiety about a loud, aggressive man over that man's life in the end. Nobody intervened to save his life. That's her main point. But this is what we are. We're going to prioritize our comfort, our safety, our security. We're going to prioritize our wealth. We're individuals and we're part of a group. So that's why you need to bemoaning people's human nature is crazy. Recognize it. We do need to unite the working class in support of better life conditions for them, to ensure that everyone has enough and no one has too much. But we're also individuals. In this case, though, without some kind of coalition, cohesion that seeks, rather than to divide us, but to unite us, to end the conditions that lead to Jordan Neely's on the subway acting the way they're acting, and also that end kind of a vibe that it's okay. It's just all right to respond with violence, to respond with aggression, or to pretend that you're on the side of the oppressed when you're bemoaning the fact that Jordan Neely was murdered or was killed, was manslaughter, the victim of manslaughter. You're bemoaning that fact, and at the same time bemoaning the fact that people don't show more sympathy for him. It is a class issue in the end. The people who are victims of the Jordan Neelys are the ones who, sadly, are the least sympathetic in a lot of ways to him. And that's human nature. There's vast support for more New York Police Department officers on the subway. This is despite all the defund the police, Black Lives Matter. Highest among those with less than $50K a year in income. And Black New Yorkers are the ones who want more police more than anybody else. If there had been a police officer on that subway train, Jordan Neely would still be alive. That's my takeaway. That's a major takeaway. But it's also, when I say there been a concerted government effort, government action to protect the people on the subway and to protect Jordan Neely from the get-go, long before he became a busker on the subway, imitating Michael Jackson for pennies. Long before that, then this wouldn't have happened. And the only way we'll have those kind of social programs is if we have a coalition of poor, struggling, working people all demanding it. All demanding everyone have enough, everyone has enough, that everyone have enough, and nobody has too much. We're going to move on to another story. It's 11:43. If you want to join me, 240-363-7190. I just want to show you the comments from the New York Times. Show how completely they misread or they don't care what their readers want or believe. So in response to the story about the killing of Jordan Neely, including using that term, it was a homicide, the number one most highly recommended comment, and there were over 2,000 comments. This response from Martin Goodall was recommended by the most. 2,442 recommended it. He describes the incident as this. He was violently threatening passengers, including women and children. This happens almost every time I get on the subway. When someone says, I'm ready to go to jail, it means they've reached a place where incarceration is the only way to get bad, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. I am sorry for his death, but I have no doubt that the man who restrained him was protecting the public. That is the most popular comment. 2,442 recommended it in the New York Times, defending Daniel Penny, saying it was a defense of others killing. Now, it wasn't. It clearly wasn't. And in the moments immediately before the death, when life could have still been sustained in Jordan Neely, he was no danger to anyone. He was not a threat, and Daniel Penny wasn't protecting anybody. But the vibe, the feeling, the dynamic on the subway is that there are predators out there. They are scary. They are making me nervous. They are a threat. And if you take one down and in the end you kill them, you're protecting us. That's how people feel. You may not like it. You may not agree with it. I don't agree with it. But I understand it. And I understand that if we want a better world, if we don't want Trump's vigilante people like that, vigilante supporters like Trump, or frankly, Eric Adams, although I think he's certainly less irresponsible, but he is for cutting the budget for social services. If we don't want more incidents like this, or where homeless people punch women in the face violently, if we don't want that to happen, we have to create a better government. We have to elect better people. And those people, unfortunately, at least for now, they're not the AOC. She hasn't done what she needs to do. That's why I believe we need a progressive alternative. We need an organization that is going to unite poor, struggling, working people for candidates who are going to consistently be on our side. So more comments. These are the most popular comments in response to that article in the New York Times. The three most popular. A lot of times, you'll see dueling most populars in the comments section. Like you'll have one person who would say, yeah, Penny, he was protecting us. And then another bemoaning what Penny did. But that's not what you're seeing. What you see here, the three most popular comments by far, all take Penny's side. The man had 44 prior arrests, still walking around threatening people, meaning Neely. If there's any blame, it should be on the criminal justice system, which allows career criminals back out on the street. So he's saying, no, we don't blame Daniel Penny for this. And then Gringo says a man died sadly, but the comments from the mental illness and homeless advocates seem overblown. We'll never know if the 24-year-old misjudged the situation. We shouldn't have to guess every day if the wild, crazy people on the subway are going to attack us. And that person got almost 1,900 recommendeds. Now, you could say that these are just three people who are more conservative. They're Fox watchers, whatever. They're reading the situation incorrectly. I say they're reading the situation incorrectly. But their view is, at least if you go by recommendeds, in a newspaper that's pretty far to the left, it's pretty liberal, at least when it comes to these kind of issues, these law and order issues or law and order and justice issues, and et cetera. The response from people who live in New York, and they all say NYC, you can see where it says NYC. Now, maybe they're lying. You never know. They could be lying. The other guy, Martin, rides a subway every day. They're always on the subway. This is the prevailing response. This was Eric Adams. Mayor Adams' response was, I don't know if we should arrest this guy. Well, of course he should be arrested based on the facts. And we know what the facts are. We can see them. But the prevailing sentiment is the subways are dangerous. We need to be protected from people like Jordan Neely. And I think another feeling that people have, black, white, Latino, remember Vasquez is the one who, I have mixed feelings about it, is what he said, is the feeling is Jordan Neely is challenging. He does make us uncomfortable. We don't want to be around him. And we're in a confined space. Daniel Penny doesn't make us nervous. He doesn't make us concerned. He's not a threat to us. So why are we putting him in jail? And the answer would be because he killed somebody and he didn't need to kill them and he shouldn't have killed them. But the life experiences of our fellow Americans are such that they're not in a place where they have a lot of sympathy. Even for a homeless man, if that person has been arrested a lot of times and is making them uncomfortable and on occasion assaulting or threatening them. If you don't like that world, then you've got to get behind progressives, and we've got to figure out how to unite, again, poor, struggling, and working people, as correctly the World Socialist website says. And one way you do that is you don't deny individualism. You don't pretend that there's a side of us that, is looking out for ourselves. But you use that side of us to unite us for policies that will benefit all of us. And by the way, will also lead to more freedom. So if you want to start a company, you'll be able to. You'll have healthcare, so you can go off on your own. You can march to your own drummer because you have that economic security that we all deserve. But will you ever get to be so rich that you can pervert the system? No, we're not going to allow you to get that way. Get there. If you want to save the Jordan Neelys of the world, and you also want to save Subway, we've got to find a different political system than the one we have now. And I guarantee you the answer is neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump, nor for that matter, unfortunately, it appears, is it AOC and Bernie. At least they're not fighting hard enough for us. I like Helen Gim. I think she was trying to do just what I said. I'm sorry she lost in Philadelphia. I'm more sorry that Helen Gim apparently will not run as an independent, or better yet, maybe she will. Maybe she'll run as a Working Families Party candidate. I think it's much better if you don't win the Democratic primary, if you hadn't run in the Democratic primary at all. There are few instances where that's not the case. For example, Bernie in 2016, when he ran in the Democratic primary, he showed himself to be more popular nationwide than Hillary. He made himself a viable national political figure who could win the presidency. He wasn't that before 2016. He should have run after the Democratic primary as the Green Party candidate. Nothing barred him from doing that. He should have done that. He might have won. And what would have the result been if he hadn't won? Well, Trump won anyway. Trump became president anyway. Bernie could have created a viable alternative to the Democratic Party, which is what we absolutely need. That's the only way we're going to get the funding we need for the social services, the protections for people like Jordan Neely, and for the people on the subway as well. I hope Helen Gim run well. I mean, like I said, I think in general, if you're a person like she is well known in the city of Philadelphia. She was a city councilwoman. People knew who she was. I would have preferred she just run on the working families ticket, not even run as a Democrat. She didn't make that decision. I think that was a mistake. That's what I would like for RFK Jr. to do. I would much prefer for him to run not as a Democrat, because I think the Democratic Party is where good people go to become bad people, and good ideas go to become nothing. Here's what RFK Jr. has to say about this. And then I want to make a final comment about the media, which I think is really interesting. So this was an observation I made, which I'm curious about, from a 19th century novel that had a great quote. So here's RFK Jr. on the Crystal and Sagar show, Breaking Points, and I was really disappointed with this answer. Maybe you aren't. Let's get to this. Here we go. Oh, let's see. We're having this video. Here we go. I'm going to start it again because I want you to hear it from the beginning. So we'll unmute. First we'll unmute. And now we'll play the video.
Some big news here to share with you.
That's right. We just wrapped our RFK Jr. interview. We covered a hell of a lot of topics. What do we do, Crystal?
Final question for you is, do you plan to support whoever the Democratic nominee is? And do you have any intention of running third party if you're running the Democratic primary?
I plan on winning the Democratic primary.
Okay, but
all right, so let me interrupt. So again, I was disappointed in this interview at the end here with, this is again, Crystal and Sagar, Breaking Points. They only gave you this little snippet of the interview, but it was the snippet I wanted, so I don't really care. So he's asked, what if you're not, will you support the nominee if you're not the nominee? And he says, well, I plan to win. That's what they all say. I think there's an outside chance, RFK Jr. I don't say it's impossible. I really don't. I think you could win. You're not there are lots of candidates I think have no chance. I think in this situation, maybe you have a small chance, an outside chance. But just to say you plan to win is, it's a little bit delusional maybe. And you've got some views that are a little out there. So maybe this isn't one you want to, play that same game where you're saying something that really the evidence doesn't support. But okay, you plan to win when asked whether you'll support the nominee. So you're saying you're presuming you'll be the nominee, so of course you'll support yourself.
They're rigging things. They're not going to allow debates. It's going to make it very difficult for you. So if something happens and you don't succeed, what then?
I do not have a plan B.
No plan B?
Right, so that was unfortunate, right? Because she had asked him, Crystal Ball had asked RFK Jr., would you run as a third party candidate? Are you going to endorse, and he's like, I don't have a plan B, meaning I'm not going to challenge the Democrat. And I get it. If you run in the Democratic primary, I feel like there's kind of a little bit of I have moral questions about whether you run as a third party. I mean, it's sort of like a two bites at the apple. Should you really be allowed those? I think with Bernie, it was different in 2016 because he was not a national figure. He used the Democratic primaries to bolster his name recognition and to become the most popular politician in America. Also, it was clear the Democratic establishment had rigged the game against him. So, but he did lose. I mean, he lost. So I'm kind of playing it both ways. I think that was a situation where, generally I think if you run in a primary and you lose the primary, you kind of have an obligation not to run as a quote, spoiler, unquote, in a third party. I think in the case of Bernie, it was yes, there is that consideration, but other considerations were more important. You have two terrible choices. You have Trump and you have Hillary. They're both awful. Neither one is fighting for the American people ever. Both are just selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic people. So to save the country, run as a third party candidate. I'm not sure if all those same considerations apply with RFK Jr. He has more of a national platform than Bernie did in 2016. Maybe you run if you can and you try to build a third party now. Maybe that's a better option for you. But all that said, I would welcome a third party run at any point from RFK Jr. I'm very sorry that his apparent loyalty to the Democratic Party outweighs his sense of what is necessary to make our nation a better place for all Americans.
And do you plan to endorse, if Joe Biden is the nominee or Marianne Williamson, do you plan to endorse the eventual Democratic
I doubt
nominee?
if I would endorse anybody who's supporting the war. I think that's what my,
So you could endorse Trump then?
All right, so that's his litmus test. And I love that follow-up by Crystal Ball. But we'll get to the final answer because I do support RFK Jr. I want him to be the Democratic nominee. Not that I think he would change everything the way I want it, or maybe would even ultimately create conditions where we could have the change we need. I don't think Bernie would have. Bernie disappointed me in a lot of ways. I think if Bernie had been elected in 2016 or maybe 2020, things would be a lot better than they are. But in the end, not that much would. In the end, we'd still have a profoundly unequal society. But Bernie would be moving us in the right direction. Maybe we could possibly get there. I think we need a third party, a viable third party to do it. That's why I'm so upset by what RFK Jr. said about no plan B. But I do like that he said, I won't endorse anyone who supports the war in Ukraine. I think that he's absolutely right there. And I think that rules out it does rule out both Biden and Marianne Williamson, because both of them support the U.S. Aid to keep that war going forever and to just until there's no Ukrainians left, and precious few Russians as well. So Crystal Ball's like, well, but Trump's against the war, right? So would you endorse him? And here's his response.
I don't see that happening.
You would never endorse President Trump.
I don't. I think we have so many differences in style and approach that I probably would never end up there.
All right, so that's the right answer too. You can't endorse. I mean, Trump. There's just too many issues, and where Trump is just so dangerous. Like, I mean, January 6th. I always go back to that. January 6th. That he's trying to take over the country in a sort of a half-hearted, half-assed way that wasn't going to happen, but completely failing to acknowledge you lost. I don't, and I would make the same case, although slightly less strongly, that Hillary should have no business. Well, I would make it for the same, creating out of whole cloth, a fake narrative that you lost because Trump conspired with the Russians, completely false, completely untrue, bogus, bogging down our country in an incredibly hyper-partisan food fight. Yeah, you should never be president either, Hillary. All right, and on that note, have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow. I do have a guest. We'll be talking how to act Maryland tomorrow.